This Sunday, Attorney General Eric Holder sits down for his first live Sunday morning interview. The question, what does the attempted bombing in Times Square say about the new face of terror? And what do you do to stop a homegrown threat? Then our political roundtable weighs in. The oil spill in the Gulf, the economy, and immigration. Is the government doing too much or not enough? With us, New York Times columnist David Brooks, Washington Post columnist E.J. Dionne, the BBC's Katty Kay, and Wes Moore, author of the new book, The Other Wes Moore. Finally, a look back in our Meet the Press Minute. 21 years ago, another massive oil spill in U.S. waters, and the questions: who cleans it up and who pays?
From NBC News in Washington, Meet the Press with David Gregory.
Good morning. The president is close to making a decision on a Supreme Court nominee. Over the weekend, aides prepared Mr. Obama with materials and their final recommendations, clearing the way for the president to now make his choice to replace retiring Justice Stevens. Here with us now, the Attorney General of the United States, Eric Holder. Welcome to the program.
Good to be here.
My apologies for my voice. I'm under the weather. I'll keep my distance.
All right.
Let me ask you about that Supreme Court choice. The president will make this decision, will announce this decision as soon as when?
I think the decision will be announced very shortly. The president has had a wealth of good candidates to consider, and I think he's looking for a person who will understand that we have to have a Supreme Court that understands its decisions and the impact those decisions have on the average American person.
An announcement tomorrow?
I think we're going to have an announcement very soon.
Very soon. As early as tomorrow. Is that fair?
I'd say we're going to have one very soon.
One of the people that you work closely with, of course, is thought to be one of the finalists, and that's Elena Kagan, the Solicitor General of the United States. She's 50 years old. She was a former dean of Harvard Law School. She doesn't have much of a paper trail. Is it reasonable to expect that we can get an understanding of her judicial philosophy, given that background?
Oh, yeah. I think that she's done a great job as Solicitor General, the first woman to ever hold that job, first woman to be the dean of the Harvard Law School. I think people will get understanding who she is, what her judicial philosophy is, if in fact she is the pick. She's done a wonderful job in the Justice Department. I've known her since the Clinton years, and I think she would be a great justice. Let
me move on to the Times Square plot. The suspect involved here is Faisal Shahzad, who was responsible, you have said, for planting a bomb that did not go off in Times Square. The important question now is whether Shahzad is part of the ongoing jihadist campaign against the United States.
Well, I can say that the evidence that we've now developed shows that the Pakistani Taliban has directed this plot. We know that they helped facilitate it. We know that they helped direct it. And I suspect that we are going to come up with evidence that shows they helped to finance it. They were intimately involved in this plot.
Now, the Pakistani Taliban is a militant organization that has pulled off huge terror plots within Pakistan, thought to be behind the assassination of Benazir Bhutto. What specifically was done here, and over what period of time, that they would plan to do something rather unusual, which is an external operation against the United States?
Well, this is an ongoing investigation. There's only so much that I can talk about, but I am comfortable in saying that they were involved in what Shahzad tried to do. And I think that's an indication of the new threat that we face. These terrorist organizations, these affiliates of al-Qaeda or these organizations that are somehow connected to the kinds of things that al-Qaeda wants to do, indicates the worldwide concerns that we have to have if we're going to be effective.
Well, before I ask you about that changing face of terror, is it a danger when you have officials like Secretary of Homeland Security Janet Napolitano saying at this very table last week that this appeared to be a one-off attack, or the General of Central Command, David Petraeus, saying that Shahzad appeared to be a lone wolf, and now you're saying, no, this was part of a Pakistani Taliban plot?
Well, you know, the evidence develops, and I think we have to always try to be careful to make sure that the statements that we make is consistent with the evidence that we have developed. And it certainly looked, I think, at the beginning of this investigation like it could have been a one-off. Over the course of this week, we've developed information, we've developed evidence that shows that the involvement of the Pakistani Taliban.
Was there an attempt to falsely reassure the public?
No, that's not at all. I think that those comments, that certainly was my view, at least I think initially, that that was probably what we were dealing with. But as the days have passed and as we've had a chance to investigate, we've come to the conclusion that I've just announced.
What kind of cooperation are we getting from Pakistan with regard to tracking down those elements who might be responsible? And how high up within the Pakistani Taliban organization does this go?
Well, again, I don't want to get into too much of the ongoing investigation, but I am satisfied with the help that we've gotten from our Pakistani counterparts. I think they have done an awful lot. They have been aggressive. Do we want them to do more? Yes, and we will be making more requests of them in the coming days.
What happened to this guy, Shahzad? He's an American. He's living happily here with his family, and then he starts traveling back and forth to Pakistan, leaves his family over there, and comes back and lives a very different life. How does he get radicalized, if that's what happened?
That's not something that we fully understand yet. He is in the process of cooperating with us. He's talking to people who are interviewing him on behalf of the United States government, and part of that is to try to understand what is it that took him over the edge and that converted him from being a person who seemingly was an average American to somebody who was bound and determined to kill Americans. We are in the process of trying to determine
Why
that.
doesn't he get on the radar screen earlier? If he is ferrying money, as we know, back and forth over a number of years, if you think the Taliban is providing him with money when he comes back to the U.S. in pretty modest means, how does he not get on the radar at a time when we know that law enforcement here and intelligence officials are tracking people who go back and forth to Pakistan?
Well, that's one of the things that we're looking at, to see if he was, in fact, in any of our databases and to see what we knew about him before the events of last week. Again, the investigation is ongoing. He is cooperating with us, and we think through the combination of what we're doing and what he is telling us, we'll get a better sense of who he is and who he was.
Look at this changing face of terror. We put up on the screen some of the people who have been involved in recent plots. You have Najibullah Nazi involved in that New York subway plot, an American citizen. Major Nadal Hassan, the Fort Hood massacre, also U.S.-born Army psychiatrist. Then you have Hussein and other students from Northern Virginia who go and are arrested in Pakistan. December 2009, Abdul Talib, is a Nigerian, but he had a visa to the United States. In March of this year, Colleen LaRose, she was called Jihad Jane for a plot to kill a Swedish cartoonist. She's from Pennsylvania. And then Shahzad. Former Secretary of Homeland Security Michael Chertoff told Andrea Mitchell on MSNBC this week, there is a pattern here. Here's how he described it. We put that on the screen. He said, this is why they are recruiting people who have clean records. Our American citizens have lived in America because they want to take advantage of that cleanliness as a way of invading our defenses. We have a new attempt here to use people who have easy access to the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly hear from them that they're looking for people, as they call it, people with clean skins. They're trying to get people into the country or use people who don't fit any kind of a profile, or not people who you might expect to be involved in these kinds of activities. And that's why we have to redouble our efforts in terms of intelligence gathering to make sure that we are fully cognizant of what is it they're planning to do, who are they trying to use in coming up with these plots. It makes our job more difficult. Not one that we can't do, but certainly makes it more difficult.
How many people right now are we tracking who are going back and forth to Pakistan?
Well, 200,000 people per year go back and forth between the United States and Pakistan, and we're doing a fair amount of monitoring with regard to that number.
When, in this context, when is racial profiling illegal?
Well, I'm not sure. I don't even talk about whether or not racial profiling is illegal. I just don't think racial profiling is a particularly good law enforcement tool. If one focuses on particular groups, that necessarily means you're taking law enforcement away from places where they probably ought to be, especially
But what
given,
happened in this case?
Well,
wasn't it racial profiling that led us to ultimately get the most important piece of information from this guy, which was a telephone number that he uses in the plot because he was held aside for a second screening earlier this year?
No, what led us to him was good, normal law enforcement, looking at what people did, tracking down that car, where did that car come from, who owned that car, who sold that car, doing all the kinds of things that we do in traditional law enforcement without any resort to racial profiling.
But where is the line, Mr. Attorney General? Because, I mean, this is very complicated. If you have U.S. citizens who are being used, who are going back and forth to Pakistan, we are tracking people from Pakistan and Yemen for reasons that are relevant, that are germane to law enforcement, not because they just happen to be Pakistani. So where is the line when you talk about profiling?
Again, I don't think that profiling is good law enforcement. What you want to do is to see people who are going back and forth, what in fact are they doing? Are they bringing substantial amounts of cash back and forth? What are they doing when they're over in Pakistan, when they're in Yemen? What are they doing here in the United States? Is there a predicate? Is there a basis for us to believe that we ought to focus our law enforcement attention on them? Not based on the basis of the color of their skin or the kind of name that they have, but on the basis of what it is that they do.
So if a Pakistani who's a U.S. citizen is coming back from Pakistan today, and a white woman from Pennsylvania is coming back from Pakistan, you're telling me that at the airports they ought not pay more careful attention to the Pakistani?
No, you ought to pay attention to the person who you have a suspicion about, a person who you have a basis to believe wants to do harm to our nation. If you look at the arrests that we made in Pennsylvania of white women, those were people who were bound and determined to do something very negative with regard to the United States. And racial profiling would not have picked those people up.